Broderick here from the WoW TCG subreddit and Discord, here with a deck tech for one of the game's most popular, tried and true aggro decks. This is Aberration Aggro Hunter, it's Alliance or Blue. A lot of people call this deck Werewolves because there's actually about 16 werewolves in it, so that's kind of where it started. For the core of the deck, let's swing over here. Let's talk about the main reason, it's even the name of the deck, Aberration. Here's the mechanic. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to this ally. So, all three of these allies have it. And then Lady Bancroft has something similar. Prevent all damage that opposing heroes would deal to this ally. So she can even... So she doesn't stop all non-combat damage, but she prevents everything that heroes would do. So even if a hero would attack her with like a weapon or Assault 1 or something, she still takes nothing. Shows that she's very difficult to get rid of for solo decks. But the main point of this deck is Aberration. So here's some cards. Here's Vakus. And this guy can give anyone else Aberration as well, including your hero. So he can even come in and help save other allies who don't have Aberration. The reason this thing is so strong is because there's a lot of cards it's strong against. Particularly in this example, we have Mage. You guys have seen Blizzard before. It's at the start of the attacker's turn, usually the person against the Mage. Blizzard pings all their stuff for 1 and then it can't attack. However, anything with Aberration doesn't get pinged for 1 because it ignores the damage. So all these guys just ignore Blizzard completely, which is Mage's biggest defense against aggressive decks. And in fact, this is one of the worst matchups for Mage in general. So these guys with Aberration dodge Blizzard, they dodge Brutalize, just the bottom part there that says you can sacrifice it to shoot a guy for 2, and a character dealt damage can't attack, but they just don't take any damage. So not only do they take nothing, they also don't get tapped for the turn. Smoldering Blast, this is like Lightning Bolt on a stick, except it doesn't work against Aberration. And even this popular Paladin removal, it's kind of like a board wipe. You make every ally basically punch itself, but it's non-combat damage, so they ignore that as well. And this is probably one of the most popular anti-aggro cards. Whenever an opposing hero or ally readies, he deals 2 range damage to it. All these creatures dodge that, so decks that rely on cards like these have a very difficult time facing up against this aggro deck. Let's jump into more of the synergies here that we have. Envoy of Mortality is a weapon. The stats are pretty efficient. It only costs 2. It costs 1 to swing with every turn, which is great. It shoots for 4, and you have long range when you're using it. Long range means you don't take damage back from anyone else who has an attack, so it's great for killing off opposing creatures and taking nothing in return. But the bottom part of the card says, when your hero deals damage with this weapon, it also deals that much range damage to a target friendly hero or ally. What does that mean? Pretty much, whenever you deal damage, the bottom left of 4, whatever you have it modified to, it's usually just going to be 4, you will also have to shoot something in your party for that much non-combat damage. Which is pretty great when you have all these Aberration guys. Because basically what you say is, you do your attack, you swing at someone, do some damage, and then you designate, like, okay, I'll put 4 damage on this Aberration guy. Which does nothing to it. So, once this card's in play, you can basically just kill off an enemy ally that has 4 health or less every turn for the rest of the game. Well, it only works if you have Aberration guys in play. You can still just throw 4 damage on your own hero. It's not that bad if you're trying to remove allies. Ring of Trials is another one. This is a location, and in case you're not familiar, you can only have 1 location out. And on the bottom right is the counter cap. So you're going to be putting a dice in this thing for counters, and you can't exceed that cap. So it will always cap at 3. Getting to the text, this says whenever a hero or ally in your party does damage, you add a counter. When you get to 3 counters, tap this location, remove all 3, and then I choose an ally in my party, my opponent chooses an ally in his party, and they deal melee, non-combat damage to each other equal to their own attack. That's a lot of words, but basically how that would work. Okay, here's a quick example of how Ring of Trials might work. It's just a setup game versus Bogmara. It's another aggro deck. Sure, that's their hand. And we drew this. So we would play something like turn 1, stash Magni, go to the tokens deck, search for, let's type in Dwarf. There it is, Dwarf Warrior. Alright, he flips over, and then use our turn 1 to play Garet Vice. And we'd pass turn to our opponent. And they've got, let's see what they drew. Another quest. So they'd go something like quest. And turn 1, a 3/2 dude. And that's it. Okay, for us, we would draw a card, untap, play Ring of Trials. Now it's in play, and we can start adding damage to add some counters to it. And then we would say something like, let me see if there's any way we can actually, we might be able to trigger it this turn. But for starters, we would swing into the enemy hero for 2, and that would give us our first counter. Maybe use this token, punch them for 1 more. That gives us our second counter. Now there's a couple plays. We could play Vakus like this. Here's the example. We could play Vakus, use Vakus to hit the opponent for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then tap Ring of Trials and use this guy to attack. We'd basically tap Ring of Trials, remove the counters. These two hit each other. This guy dies. Vakus has Aberration, so she doesn't die. We get another counter because that ally did damage, and then Vakus dies at the end of the turn. That is a realistic play. Like, our opponent has 7 damage, and we already have 2 creatures in play, and we're ready to trade another one. That's one play we could have gone with, and let's say that's what we did go with. Our opponent would draw another 1-drop, and they could do something like play this quest. And if they're trying to catch up, I don't know how much they want to play Warlock. They could play this Warlock. They take another 3. It's, oh well, it just happens, right? And then they'd use Promises of Darkness to kill off this creature. He would die. And then our opponent would take 1 and then draw another card. And then this guy comes into play for free from my opponent. So it's quite a turn. And then we go back to our turn. We would untap, draw 1, and get another Ashnaar. Sweet. We can go ahead and play our quest. And now we've got some options for the turn. We could pay. Oh, again, we could play Vakus again. Having multiple Vakus is pretty cool. But I think Ashnaar is going to end up being a better turn. We play Ashnaar, so now our hero has Assault X, so he has Assault 2. So we could use our hero to go ahead and trade into this creature for 2. So we would take 3, that creature would die, and we get a counter for doing damage. Use Garet, hit our opponent for 2 more, get a counter, tap, remove all the counters, and you make Garet fight this creature. This creature dies. Garet did more damage. We get another counter back. Like, this is nuts. We just keep clearing their board for nothing. We have 1 less card in hand than they do, but we're 10 life above them, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 2 attack from here. We have 6 more attack in play than them. Like, these are the kind of plays that you could do. Earlier I did the play with Vakus. You could have done something similar with Ashnaar where you just saved the counters, but just showing you how useful this is. In fact, so let's say you do something like turn 1, play this guy, turn 2, untap, you put another resource down, swing in, and your opponent has some kind of removal spell. In response, you can spend your 2 resources and Rufus, targeting this guy, giving him Aberration. That way, if your opponent has like something that just shoots him for 2 damage, you've also saved this guy as well. And that's almost a game-winning play, just getting that much value in turns 1 and 2. And Fang is the only pet in the deck. He's a 2-drop 2/4, so he's very efficient. Protector, which matters sometimes because you can save your other guys from getting traded into by, like, 1-drops that have 2 attack, which can save, that'll trade into any of these. And pretty much all your low drops can be traded easily. So having a Protector out means you can tap to protect, eat their guy, and this guy will probably live with 1 or 2 health left. He also gives everyone Assault 1, including himself. So he's generally a 2-drop 3/4 when he's attacking. So this guy has a lot of value. This guy also has synergy with the next card, Ashnaar Frost Herald. Your hero has Assault X, where X is this ally's attack. So your hero just gets 2 attack, gets 2 assault almost all the time this guy's in play. Which means you can use your hero to clear off opposing low-drop creatures, and then your opponent's creatures won't be able to trade into yours. It's just how you establish board control. This deck is a lot like Zoo, except the creatures are immune to spells. This guy synergizes with Fang, though, because Fang gives him Assault 1, which would mean he'd give your hero 2 plus the 1 from the Assault 1. So he'd give your hero 3 attack. So with or without the gun, your hero can just start trading into opponent's creatures or just deal a lot of damage. Chipper Ironbane. There's only 3 of this guy in the deck. There's 1 in the sideboard. He's basically utility, but he's really efficient. Look at him. He's a 2-drop 3/1. This guy hits hard. Anytime you want, just pay X, sack him, and you can pop an opposing ability or equipment, cost X. So it's not the most efficient way, but sometimes you just need a way to deal with opposing abilities and equipment. And we're lucky we get an efficient little beater. Alright, this row isn't just about cost. This row's got some random stuff, but let's start with this guy. This guy is insane. He's a 3-drop 3/2. He has him Power Hunter, and we always have a Hunter hero, so it will always trigger. So this guy comes into play as a 5 attack, ferocity, and long range. So he can come into play and immediately kill any other creature with 5 health and take nothing in return. Most of the time, though, you end up just going face, because 5 damage out of nowhere is just really hard for your opponents to try and keep up with, especially if you draw 2 or 3 of these in the game. So this is just one of your most efficient damage dealers with ferocity. This guy also helps trade a lot in any matchups that are creature-heavy matchups with a lot of trading. He just kind of makes that unfair. Weldon. This guy doesn't seem like he would belong in the deck. Well, he does. He's a 5-drop 5/5, so really nice stats, but he's got one of the most overpowered abilities I've ever seen. At the end of your turn, you get 3 1/1 protector tokens, and then kill them at the end of the next turn. So you're never going to be able to attack with the tokens, but you will always be able to defend with them. Basically, the tokens come into play at the end of your turn, they die at the end of your opponent's turn. This is ridiculously hard to deal with if your opponent's a creature deck or like a warrior or something reliant on attacking. They just have to find a way to get rid of this guy. Otherwise, they can't ever trade in. Meanwhile, this guy still bashes for 5. That's a lot of damage. And with 5 health, he dodges a lot of removal. And by turn 5 in the game, your opponent should have used most of their removal against your deck. Moving on to Avatar of the Wild. Just pay X, get an XX token with Ferocity. Cards like this exist in Magic. I don't think they get Ferocity, but still, they're just not as valued as they are in this game. Because you can use creatures as removal, this card is very, very flexible, and you should use it as a flexible slot. Like on turn 3, if you just need a 3/3 with Ferocity, you should play it. You shouldn't think like, yeah, I could wait till turn 6, because this guy will probably get to attack 2, 3, or 4 times, so he'll deal between like 3 to 12 damage. Anyways, just very efficient, very flexible, has Ferocity, makes the deck very difficult to deal with. When there's too many threats that have Ferocity, too many threats that have really good trading potential, too many threats that cards just don't work against, and even if they decide to kill this off, it already had damage in with Ferocity. Envoy we talked about earlier. This is one of the ways that no matter how many creature removal spells your opponent has, you can just choose to start going face with Envoy of Mortality, just shoot your opponent for 4 every turn. Even if you take 4 back, there's a point at which it won't matter if you just get his health, if you just kill him before you die. It's a great way to end games. We talked about Ring of Trials already. Magni. So this guy is basically just a resource. Ignore all this top part of the text and just read the stash on the bottom. Stash, if you don't know, is place this card as a resource face up, and then flip it over. In this case, you can play it turn 1 as a resource, flip it over, and immediately get a 1/1 token. And that's a lot of the times how this deck will play out. You'll start resource, turn 1/1 token, and then play a 2/1. So you have immediately 3 attack. And one of them's already immune to spells, and then you have a 1/1 token. So if your opponent plays any 1/1s, you can use your token to trade into their 1/1, and then continue to attack and then develop more 1/1s, or play a 2/2. This gives you a lot of presence. Especially because this token's just a 1/1, but again, with other cards like Fang giving him Assault 1, he can become a 2/1, and so he can start trading up into 2 and 3 drop zone. Like, the tempo that you get out of getting a free token in a deck that's all about cheap creatures is pretty nuts. Report to Goldshire. If you have more allies than your opponent, just pay 1, draw a card. Just really efficient. You almost always have this active. Finkle Einhorn. Yeah, we've all seen that movie. So during your turn, you can only do this on your turn, but whatever. You pay 3, get an ally, cost 2 or less from your graveyard into play. So basically, pay 3, reanimate any of these creatures. So if you need, more equipment ability destruction, you can grab this guy back. If the game's almost over, you just need some ferocity damage, you can grab this guy back. Otherwise, you can just grab efficient creatures like Fang or Jadefire. You can grab back Ashnaar, give your hero Assault 2, immediately trade into something. There's a lot of pretty powerful things you can do. It's just a cheap and efficient way. Instead of drawing you cards, it draws and plays you cards that were already used. There's only 2 of this in the deck, because sometimes you just don't have 3 mana. 1 Draenei's Junk. This card is great. It costs 2. It's kind of like Ponder in Magic, if you've ever played that. So you pay 2, reveal the top 3 cards, and you can get a card that costs 1, 2, or 3, and the rest go to the bottom. This card gets you almost everything in the deck. It dodges resources, Magni, and Weldon, and Avatar. But other than that, you can get all these aggressive cards. So it's just a good way to keep the gas going. Dr. Boom, there's only one of these in the deck. Pay 1, reveal the top card of your deck, take damage equal to its cost, and then draw it. Most of your cards cost 1, 2, or 3, so this is just an efficient draw spell. It just costs, there's just one of the cards in the deck that only costs 1. It's kind of like the 5th copy of this in a way, because your health just really doesn't. If you're having to worry about your health, then you're not looking too good in that game. Looking at the sideboard, there's only 10 cards of sideboard in this game. We have 4 Banzai. A 1-drop 0/3 has +1 attack for every card in opposing graveyards. This is good versus graveyard decks. It's also good versus decks where the game might just go on too long. Because instead of, pooping out like a 1-drop 3/2, you can make like a 1-drop 15/2 or 15/3. So one turn of this, especially if you can reanimate it with Finkle Einhorn. I mean, a 1-drop with 10 to 15 attacks, pretty nuts. That should just be the end of that. One more Vakus in case you're in decks where you just keep going to an aggressive race and you don't need a Weldon. He's a little expensive. Maybe you just need a little bit more ferocity damage. There's only one more of those. One more Chipper just to keep adding to the equipment and ability destruction. Jeishal, similar. When she enters play, you can destroy an opposing armor. So you can destroy any opposing armor. However, if the cost is 2 or less, you get to draw. So this card is a cheap, efficient threat, a 2-drop 3/2. It can even get card advantage if you pop low-drop armor. This card's good for the warrior matchups or Death Knight matchups that have a lot of equipment. You can get card advantage out of popping their equipment, which is just going to be shutting down your offense every turn, so it's pretty good. It's only a 2 of. You can also reanimate this with Finkle Einhorn. 2 Snipes. When the next ability, ally, or equipment enters play, destroy it. This is instant, so what you do is you wait for your opponent to play something. Like if your opponent plays this on your turn, well, they play this on their own turn. On your turn, you leave up some mana, pay 2, tap Snipe, which goes into play in response before this guy. Snipe resolves, and then this guy comes into play, and because of Snipe's effect, he comes into play, immediately dies to Snipe. Snipe's not usually for creatures, though. It is definitely for equipment and removal. That is the main thing. You can use it on allies, but you've got a plethora of ways to deal with allies already. This is just another card versus equipment and abilities. Moving on, you're trying to think, well, this is the sideboard. It's got some things in mind. Let's go look at what this deck is actually strong against and good against. We talked a little bit about the strong against stuff earlier. It's good versus ability damage. Here's what it's weak against if you're having trouble countering it. Priest has already done quite well recently. We can kind of see that because of the damage. Unpreventable holy damage. Unpreventable does go through Aberration, and so it just functions as normal removal. So this card, between 1 or 2 mana, can kill almost every threat in your deck. Searing Light, I'm not going to read all that. This is basically a 2 mana lightning bolt that's unpreventable, but your opponent can also make more lightning bolts that are unpreventable out of it. It's really good versus our deck. This card is pay 3, deal 4, unpreventable, but also prevent some damage. He prevents damage that the opponents deal to us. So this card is a huge swing in terms of life, because you can end up trading like 2 or 3 for 1. Inquisition. An ally deals damage to itself equal to its attack, but it's unpreventable holy damage. So another good removal spell. This is good in a lot of matchups, but particularly this is one of the reasons why you see so many decks going away from traditional removal. Rogue's got some great removal. Just destroy all allies with cost 2 or less. So this doesn't care about Aberration. Neither does Carnage. Just destroy all your allies. These will continue to be some of the best rogue cards ever printed. This is a weird combo. You may know about this. This is a Shaman. When an opposing ability, ally, or equipment readies, put it into its hand so it bounces opposing cards when they ready. Works pretty good with Squall Totem, where you can just play it, tap all your opponent's creatures and heroes. This little combo is pretty famous and very good at keeping the board wiped. Here's a Death Knight ability. It costs 6. That's the biggest problem for Death Knight. They've got another ability called Frozen Core, which is a 1-drop removal spell. But again, destroy all allies and you get some ghouls. But this is just a good board wipe that works against the deck. There's cheaper and efficient ways for Death Knight, but just giving examples. Looking at Druid, we've got Hibernate. This doesn't destroy a card. It puts it into your resource row. It's it's a pretty interesting card. It's very unique. This card works. I mean, you have to ramp your opponent, but whatever. It's a 2-drop instant speed, kill anything spell. It has to be Path of Exile at some point. Insect Swarm. Here's a good example of Druids having to catch up to this metagame. You pay 1, attach it to someone, and it deals 2. Well, that damage doesn't apply to Aberration, but it gives them -2 attack. This is really just a band-aid. It's not a great spell, but it does work a little bit. Because you can put this on any of these aberration creatures except, well, Ferocity. But these other people, you can put that Insect Swarm on them, and they'll go down to 0 attack. They'll still have their health pool, though. So if they ever get Assault from the pet or anything like that, they've got plenty of opportunities to come back. So Insect Swarm, really not great. The main reason people play it's because it's also good against solo heroes like Warrior and Death Knight that do a lot of attacking. So you just get to basically shut down their weapons. Hurricane. This card does damage every turn for a couple turns. It's like a board wipe. It's like Pyroclasm, essentially. But it also has the text that opposing heroes and allies can't attack or protect. So even though this card's damage won't work on the Aberration guys, none of their cards can attack. This is pretty powerful because it will kill off all the tokens and all the Jadefire Scouts and anything that's not Aberration, and then just buys you a couple turns apiece. Definitely one of the best Druid cards ever printed. Eye the Storm, this location, play 4 cards, and you can just use it to tap their board down for a turn. This is great versus this deck, and this is one of the reasons so many people play it. Sometimes you just need a little bit of temporary removal. This card will regularly stop between 6 and 12 damage when you use it the first time. Anubarak. Why is this card here? Because he's a protector and he's a 6/6. That's pretty much it. He's one of the only protectors that sees play in Classic, and when people put down a protector, opposing decks have to stop and really rethink their strategy. All these Classic decks are so efficient with just the best of everything, and so protectors have kind of gotten lost, but here's one that will just eat up their board. This is going to be a 2 or 3 for 1. Even if they have the ability to use Ring of Trials and their weapon, this guy's going to come back. He's going to constantly be a sore. And then Broderick. Broderick is just in every Horde deck for a reason. He really helps with the early game plays. And it's not ideal, but you can start using your hero to trade into the opposing creatures. A great turn for a deck with Broderick would be if your opponent does something like play Garet Vice, you just play Broderick. They play another creature or whatever. On your turn, you can swing into, like if they play this guy, you can use your Broderick, swing in here, trade to this creature, and then use your hero to trade off an Aberration creature. Broderick does a lot of work. In fact, if you go first and you play Broderick, your opponent will be reluctant to play a lot of their cards. They're going to want to try and figure out a way to get Broderick off the table or out of the graveyard. And this deck doesn't have the room for graveyard removal. It just has to be very efficient, very clean at killing your opponent. Anyways, that's Aberration Aggro Hunter. I wanted to start with this deck because every deck out there basically had to change when this deck became popular. If you want your deck to be viable in a Classic environment, you have to be able to deal with werewolves. Maybe not even consistently, but at least 30 to 40% of the games you need to try and win so you can get lucky and try to squeeze a win out of this. This deck has permanently altered like the playable removal in Classic, and it's pretty interesting. It's here to stay. Cheap, efficient threats backed up by really powerful synergy, and the difference between this game and Magic is that you've got these resources instead of lands, so this deck is going to be gassed up until you're dead. Hope you enjoyed. Also want to talk about the hero flip. On your turn 2, flip Simon. Simon deals range damage to target hero or ally equal to the attack of a pet you control. This is the only pet in the deck. On your turn, he will have 3 attack because of Assault 1. But pretty much you can just pay 2 if you have this guy in play, shoot an opposing thing for 3. Which is great. It's a pay 2 lightning bolt while Fang is in play. So that's a really cheap and reliable flip that you can use anytime you want. You can even use this to finish off heroes unexpectedly. It's a good flip. Wanted to touch on something with Banzai in this deck. We went over him for a second. So he's a 1-drop 0/3 with he has +1 attack for every card in the opposing graveyard. So obviously he's good versus any graveyard-based decks like Spider Solitaire, the Burn Rogue, even any deck that's trying to make the game go long. They don't have to go up to 15 cards. I mean, even if they're reliably going to get between like 5 and 10, that's plenty for this guy to be a 1-drop 5/3. That's really powerful. It's not just about having a 1-drop 5/3 in play. Since he's so cheap, he's easy to play in the same turn to activate the hero power, which is pay 2, flip the hero. He deals range damage to a target equal to the attack of a pet. Well, in this case, let's say I'm playing it's late game, my opponent has killed all my dudes, and we only have 4 resources. We just played everything out. We haven't been resourcing anything. Well, if it's against Warrior, they've got a lot of grindy cards. Maybe this is their deck. This is their graveyard. 12, see that number? I don't know if you can see it, but let's say they have 12 cards in their graveyard. We can spend our turn, let's say we just drew this as a hunter, pay 1 to play it, immediately pay 2 to flip, use our hero power, flip over, opponent, shoot you for 12. Yeah, and then now we have a 12-3 in play. Maybe my opponent can kill it anyways, but this is a game changer, because, come on, if your opponent's been playing this long, they probably already had more like 17 damage on them, something like that. And then you play this guy, come into play, use your flip, now you shoot him for 12? I'll put you at 1? I mean, this is a pretty realistic example of what this guy does. If he ever gets to attack, awesome for you, you've probably won that game. But he serves as an almost uninteractable late game plan. I'm not really sure if you could interact with this. I bet you could. Like, if your opponent tried to flip and you killed the pet at instant speed, that might be one way. Because I guess if you kill this pet and then you flip, you don't get to deal damage equal to the attack of a pet because you control no pets. So that's one way to counter it. But if they don't have that, I mean, they could just die. Especially if they're a little more, if they have graveyards bigger than 12. Sometimes you will see them go up to 15 or whatever, but I'll take a 1-card burn spell for 12 anytime. Hope this wins you some games. Good luck.